Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into the 2013 documentary We Steal Secrets, the story of Wikileaks.
Right. A pretty significant film.
Absolutely. Our goal is really to unpack what this film says about, the Wikileaks, its founder, Julian Assange, who everyone knows, and all the controversy around how they handled secret information and whistleblowers.
Yeah, we want to look at the key events the film actually covers and maybe try to figure out why it got such strong reactions from different people.
And for this, we're mostly drawing on the film's Wikipedia page. It gives a good overview, synopsis, production, release, all that stuff.
Gives us a solid base.
So here's something to think about right away. This film tackled a really hot-button issue, a group challenging governments, right? And the film itself was controversial before it even came out.
Yeah, that's interesting in itself.
So what can We Steal Secrets actually show us about, you know, government secrets versus the public's right to know and the people who leak things? Let's dig in.
Okay, so the film, it doesn't just start with WikiLeaks itself. It actually goes back further.
Oh, where to?
1989. The Wankworm attack on NASA computers.
Right. I remember hearing about that. But how does that connect?
Well, the film attributes it to Australian hackers and specifically mentions Assange as potentially being involved back then.
Ah, okay. So it's drawing a line sort of from early hacking culture to WikiLeaks.
Kind of seems that way, like setting a context, maybe suggesting a certain continuity.
Interesting framing right from the start. It's
Yeah.
not just presenting WikiLeaks as popping up out of nowhere. Then obviously it moves to the actual founding in 2006.
Exactly. And then things really pick up speed, focusing heavily on 2009 and 2010, that really busy period.
That was when everything seemed to explode, wasn't it?
Totally. A huge wave of leaks. The film covers the stuff about the Icelandic financial collapse, which gave a peek into, how shaky some global finance was. It also gets into the Swiss banking tax evasion secrets.
Always a big topic.
Yeah, and claims of corruption in the Kenyan government, even things like illegal toxic waste dumping coming out.
Wow. Quite a range. Each one of those is a major story on its own.
Definitely. And then, of course, there's the really personal and ethically complex part, Chelsea Manning's story.
Ah, yes. And her communications with Adrian Lamo.
Right. The film shows their chats, Manning leaking the info, and then Lamo's decision, his choice, to go to the FBI.
That part's pretty stark, isn't it? What do you think the film is trying to say there?
Well, it brings up huge questions, I think, about trust, why people do things, the personal cost,
Yeah, the human element behind the headline.
Exactly. And following that, the film tackles the release of the collateral murder video.
The airstrike footage from Iraq.
Yeah.
That had a massive impact.
Huge. It really shifted how a lot of people saw the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then came the sheer volume of documents.
The Iraq war logs?
And the Afghan war logs, and then all those U.S. diplomatic cables. Sensitive stuff.
You really can't overstate the effect those had, just peeling back the layers on diplomacy and military actions.
For sure. The film also has to address these sexual assault accusations against Assange around that time.
Right, which, whatever the legal ins and outs, definitely complicated the public image of him and WikiLeaks.
Undeniably. So, to tell this whole story, the filmmakers interviewed a lot of people.
Who did they talk to?
Well, Assange appears, but only in older interviews, archival stuff. He didn't participate directly for this film.
Interesting.
And you hear from journalists like Heather Brooke, Nick Davies, James Ball, people who were covering it closely, plus security folks like Michael Hayden, former CIA director.
Okay.
And significantly, Adrian Lamo himself is interviewed, plus others involved, like Smart McCarthy, Vaughn Smith. A pretty wide net.
But Assange didn't cooperate. You'd think he'd want his say.
Well, maybe. And Chelsea Manning also wasn't available, obviously, being imprisoned at the time. It really shows the difficulty of making a documentary when key people aren't, or can't be, involved directly.
Yeah, leaves gaps you have to fill somehow.
And apparently, some potential sources, John Young and Deborah Natsios, had materials but actually refused interviews because they objected to the film's working title early on.
Really? Even before it was finished, what does that suggest?
Well, it kind of suggests there were sensitivities, maybe disagreements about the film's angle. Right from the beginning, people were wary.
Seems like tricky territory.
Yeah.
The film also uses a lot of visual effects, right? Chat animations, headlines flying around.
Yeah, quite a bit. Framestore New York did them, something like 35 minutes worth.
That's a lot for a documentary. Why do you think they did that?
Well, so much of the story happens online, right? Chats, data dumps. It's all digital. So maybe those effects were a way to Like, make that invisible world more visible, more dynamic for the
Make
audience.
it less dry than just looking at text.
Probably. Visualize the data flow, the speed, the impact. Now, we absolutely have to talk about how WikiLeaks itself reacted, because they definitely reacted.
Oh, I bet. They didn't just ignore it.
Far from it. They actually published a full transcript of the movie online.
The whole script.
Yep, but annotated. Filled with their own comments, corrections, counterclaims, basically pushing back hard against the film's version of events.
Wow. That's quite a move. Directly challenging the filmmakers.
It is. But then the director, Alex Gibney, he fired back almost immediately.
What did he say?
He claimed the transcript WikiLeaks put out was incomplete, said it left out Manning's parts, crucially, and also that it was based on an older, unfinished cut of the film, not the final version.
Ah, so the plot thickens. A dispute about the accuracy of the critique itself.
Exactly. It becomes this meta-narrative fight. Gibney then even published his own annotated version of the WikiLeaks transcript, responding to their points.
So a real back and forth, where there's specific things they argued about.
One big one was this idea of a sealed U.S. indictment against Assange. WikiLeaks used that claim to argue the film was unfair or biased against him.
Okay, so was there an indictment or not?
Well, according to the film's associate producer, that whole idea seemed to stem mainly from one line in a leaked email from 2011.
Just one line.
Apparently. And despite that email, no actual proof of a sealed indictment surfaced publicly back then. So it shows how, rumors or interpretations can take hold even without hard evidence.
Fascinating. And the title itself, We Steal Secrets, that was controversial too, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge sticking point. Assange apparently hated it, called it biased, unethical, especially with legal stuff hanging over him, felt it judged him from the outset.
I can see why he'd feel that way.
Yeah, and apparently he even told the executive producer, Jemima Khan, that a fair film would basically have to be pro-Assange. Gives you a sense of his perspective.
So how did they defend the title then?
Well, Khan explained it wasn't their phrase originally. It's actually a direct quote from Michael Hayden, the ex-CIA director in the film.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Hayden says something like, the U.S. government is also in the business of stealing secrets, so the filmmakers perhaps were trying to draw a parallel.
So maybe less an accusation solely aimed at WikiLeaks and more a comment on the whole world of secrets, state level included.
Could be the intention. To provoke thought about who gets to define secrets and who gets to reveal them, it definitely sparked debate.
Okay, so let's pivot to the critics. How did the film go down with reviewers? You said reactions were strong.
Very mixed, actually, all over the map.
Not a universal thumbs up, then?
Definitely not. I mean, you had positive takes. The Hollywood Reporter called it tremendously fascinating, praised its complexity.
Okay.
New York Magazine said it was altogether enthralling, even felt like fiction. It was so twisty.
I praise.
And the Philadelphia Inquirer found it riveting, focusing on that collision between Assange and Manning and how maybe a quest for transparency turned darker, into paranoia. It generally did well on Rotten Tomatoes, consensus being it was fascinating, provocative, tackled big modern issues.
Right, so some really strong positive reactions. But what about the other side?
Well, you had more cautious views. The Guardian, for example, wondered if it was just too soon to really have perspective on everything.
Fair point, maybe.
Variety felt it lacked a central dramatic conflict compared to Gibney's other films, although they thought Manning's story was the most engaging part.
Interesting. So less compelling for them.
And then you get into the more outright negative critiques. A writer at Salon actually defended the film against claims it was state agitprop. So that tells you some people were seeing it that way.
Ah, okay. So accusations of bias from that angle.
Yeah. Robert Mann, who was actually interviewed in the film, later called it superficially impressive, but ultimately myopic. Kind of shallow, maybe?
And others.
Chris Hedges went further, calling it agitprop for the security and surveillance state. Basically saying it sided with the government against WikiLeaks and Manning.
Wow. Strong words.
Very. And then, of course, WikiLeaks themselves, as we said, claimed dozens of factual errors and really disagreed with how Manning's motives were portrayed. They saw conscience, felt the film implied, maybe failure of character.
So it's a complete spectrum. From enthralling and important to too soon to biased propaganda. It really shows how divisive the subject is.
Absolutely. Your view of the film likely depends heavily on your view of WikiLeaks and Assange going in. And, if you are interested in digging deeper, there are other films mentioned alongside this one.
Like what?
Well, there's The Fifth Estate, which is the fictionalized movie version with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Right.
And other documentaries like Media Stand, which WikiLeaks itself produced, Citizen 4 about Edward Snowden, and The Trust Fall, which is much more sympathetic to Assange. So lots of different perspectives out there.
Good to know. So, wrapping this up, thinking about We Steal Secrets. It's clear it's way more than just a summary of events, isn't it?
Oh, totally. The film itself became part of the ongoing WikiLeaks saga. It stirred up debate. It revealed how deeply people feel about government secrecy, transparency, whistleblowing, all that.
It tried to tackle this really complex, controversial entity and then became controversial itself.
Exactly. It's like a lightning rod attracting all these wildly different interpretations. And the fact that WikiLeaks engaged so directly, putting out their own version, that adds another layer.
Yeah, the fight over the narrative itself.
Right. It really highlights how difficult it is to control or even just understand the narrative when information and how you interpret it is just constantly up for grabs.
So considering all those reactions, the criticisms from WikiLeaks,
Yeah.
it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In this age of, information overload and competing stories everywhere, what does a documentary like this, one that gets debated so fiercely,
Yeah.
tell us about how hard it is to grasp these huge political events? Whose story do you end up believing and why?
Yeah. It leaves you with a lot to chew on long after the credits roll. A conversation that's definitely still going.